Welcome to Dirt, Sweat, and Gears, and we are back with my '89 Honda Prelude. And this is a project that kind of got away from me a little bit. It started off as a very simple kind of fix an oil leak situation, but it turned into a lot of situations of, while I'm here, why don't I fix that also? And that just took me down the rabbit hole to tearing apart not only the entire passenger side of my engine bay, but also the fenders, the front bumper, and also half my interior. Now, in my last video, we took a walk around the car. We talked about it a little bit and what I had planned to do with it. This was supposed to be kind of a fairly straightforward situation of just fix an oil leak, put it back together, maybe do a little fun things here and there. And it turned into just kind of a rabbit hole situation. So when I got the distributor off and I replaced those seals on the distributor and the cylinder position sensor, I noticed that the oil had leaked kind of all over the place. The oil especially got onto the coolant hoses, and so I had to replace those coolant hoses, and it really just turned out to be kind of an overhaul of the cooling system, not replacing most of the hoses. I didn't replace the ones in the very back behind the intake manifold because that really can be done as a separate job. I don't have to take off any of the things that I just took off in order to get to those hoses. However, there was a lot of other things that I wanted to do to this car. I wanted to change out my intake. Now, I had talked about how I have the prototype LSD Motorsports intake, but really this intake, for one, it's really heavy. It's something like 16, 14 gauge steel, so it's pretty heavy. And also it positions the filter right behind the radiator, so it takes in the maximum amount of hot air. And for what was supposed to be a cold air system, it really isn't cold at all. So I got another intake tube from AEM, and I have to make some modifications to it. I decided I wanted to put the filter behind the passenger side headlight, which is going to mean also relocating the battery. Now, if I'm going to relocate the battery, I got to take apart my interior, and also I have a wiring situation with my stereo that, since I have it all apart, I may as well address. So as you can see, this simple leak turned into taking apart half my car and spending several weeks on it. Looking inside the engine bay, this is what we've got going on here. I actually did quite a bit of work off camera because I do software development during the week. I'm a front-end software engineer, primarily in React Native right now anyway. And so I really don't have a lot of time on weekdays to do a whole lot. So usually what I end up doing is I'm working, just doing my day job, and then I'll come out here for 15-20 minutes and turn some wrenches, take a break from work, and it helps me relax. So I got this is really hard to control the flashlight, by the way, and point things out and hold the camera. So yeah. So what I ended up doing was I replaced all of the little hoses. You see this weird situation with the hoses. I've got new hoses on there. I still have to put on the thermostat housing, upper radiator hose. I replaced the lower radiator hose. I've also replaced the upper and lower heater hoses. And I'm not entirely thrilled with the heater hoses because they seemed a little bit too small. I really had to really push them in to get them to fit. But that's how it is with these cars, these old cars, especially these old cars with the metric system. And you can't get hoses from Honda anymore that are pre-molded and made to fit. So you got to get things from parts stores. So the parts stores, they're kind of the right shape, kind of the right size, but not always. The other thing I finished up was I finished up the alternator belt. And what happened was I ended up stripping the bolt at the top here where I'm flashing the light. I stripped that bolt, so I had to replace it, and it didn't go back. It wasn't very happy to go back in the new bolt. So I probably just made a lot more work for myself the next time I take that off. I also did a valve adjustment off camera. I didn't really talk about the valves. I wasn't actually really planning to do it, but it turned out that my exhaust valves were a little bit out of adjustment. The intake valves were fine. So I adjusted those, replaced the gaskets, put the valve cover back on. And I think that's about all I did for being under the hood. I pulled the battery rack and all that stuff. I started to run the new battery cable, which is hanging off here. And on the inside, you see I've removed the passenger seat, removed the center console. I've started to run the new battery cable. I want to put a fuse both at the battery cable under the hood and also another one going out from the battery to the capacitor in the trunk. So that's the remainder of this battery cable. Not much else going on under here. These wires, the wiring for the stereo, I don't really need to touch in here, so it's not that big of a deal. I think I'm in pretty good shape with the interior. Now on the trunk, I still have a lot of work to do. I received the new battery bracket from Summit Racing. I actually got a nice looking battery bracket for my battery, but the stereo wiring here is, I don't like where it comes out. I don't like the way it looks. I need to hide it, and I'm probably gonna try to run it similar to how I ran the subwoofer cabling, because this is all new, and it's probably going to mean replacing or splicing some wires, probably replacing at least the power cables. The signal cables I'm not as worried about. I'm willing to splice those, but the big ones, the big gauge ones, the powers and the grounds, I'm probably going to have to replace. So today is really going to be all about just making progress on this wherever I can. And if I get stuck somewhere, I'm likely to just move on to something else. The only real disassembly that I still need to do is in the trunk. So I'm kind of putting that off until I really get stuck underneath the hood. I need to get a thermostat gasket down at the part shop. So that's what I'm probably going to do next, and try to get this whole passenger side ready to go. I'm also probably going to start getting the intake fitted for the new location of the filter that I talked about. That's probably all I'm going to do today. If I get any farther than that, great, bonus. So it's been a long day, and at first glance it certainly doesn't look like I got a lot done. The car's still hanging out in a million pieces, but I do have a few less parts hanging out on my workbench and on the shelves, and here is the majority of the work I did was on this passenger side. So you can see here I got the hoses all fixed up, all done. I put the cylinder position sensor back on. I am waiting on the distributor until I get the cap and rotor. I don't want to bother with it until I get the cap and rotor on it. Then I'll put it on. In the meantime, I've fitted the intake. It's not secured in there yet. I just wanted to see how it fit, because I wanted to see if I was going to use this giant filter or use the filter that I had previously. I'm going to go ahead and use this filter, even though I don't like how big it is, but it is clean. So I think I'm just going to use it until it gets dirty, and then I'll clean up my old filter and put it back in, because the filter I had before was quite a bit smaller. I've got the wiring situation a little bit more figured out for the battery relocation. I'm going to have a distribution block run off of the fuse panel here, so that I can split the power properly to go to the battery and to go to the starter. So that's another part I have to buy. I'm probably going to mount it directly under the fuse box. Be a real nice and easy way to get that all sorted out. I put the thermostat back in, and the upper radiator hose is just kind of sitting there because I don't know if I want it to run above or below the air conditioning line yet. We'll see once I get the intake squared away. Moving on to the inside, I have done a little bit more work on the inside. I'm mostly done with the passenger compartment. I've got the power cable run. I've relocated the bass boost control. I'm going to put it inside my tape storage tray, and I've run the wire for that underneath the floor, and I've just run it up to the back. I've taken out the back seat, taken out some of the paneling, just so I can run the wires nice and clean back here. You'd never guess I was trying to run anything clean from the looks of it right now, but hopefully when I get it back together, it's going to look really nice. Moving on to the trunk, I've taken everything out. There's the board with the carpeting on it. Pulled some of this paneling back, and I've got a really good idea of what I want to do in here with the capacitor and the power cables. So main thing is that the power cables are too short. I have to get longer power cables. I also have to get terminal ends for all of the cables. I have done a little bit of ghetto rigging, and I've got a ground that's barely hanging on. I'm really glad I noticed it now rather than wait for it to become a problem. You see right over here, going into the strut tower bar, is barely in there. So I caught that. That's the ground for the capacitor. These grounds are too short, I think. So that means I'm going to have to pull that paneling back. Not a big deal. I've got the old power cable. I'm going to use the old power cable if I need it for some of the routing back here. Just kind of on an as needed. I need to clean this all up. It's really kind of a mess. I'm going to leave the capacitor and distribution block right where they are. I just have to run the wiring a lot cleaner, because this is not okay for me. So that's it for now. As you can see, I still have a lot more work ahead of me, but I am actually way past the halfway mark here. I am kind of on the downhill. It's all going back together very nicely, and I just can't wait to get this thing on the road. Probably one last thing that I'm going to do before I drop the car down is change the oil pan gasket. I got a new gasket, but I decided not to even begin to do that until I get all the rest of this stuff done, because that's a nightmare on its own, because I have to drop the exhaust downpipe and take part of the subframe apart, and it is just, it's an awful experience no matter how you slice it. So I just figured I would save myself that trouble until I get everything back together and I can go on a test drive, make sure everything's okay.